Hey guys, I'm excited because we are starting a new sort of series in our video devotionals this week. And we are going to be looking into the book of Jonah. And I know most of you have probably heard the story of Jonah in passing, but I bet you haven't heard it like the Bible tells it. You're probably like, oh yeah, there was Jonah and there's a whale and he got swallowed, blah, 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 blah. But I bet if pressed, you wouldn't know what the story is about. You wouldn't be able to tell me what God is trying to tell us through this story of this guy named Jonah. And our goal is to take a couple of weeks here and to go through the book of Jonah and to look at what God is saying, what God is doing through this piece of text, what the author is doing through this piece of text, and figure out maybe how Jonah and you and me, how we can relate. The story of Jonah is one that I find myself relating to as I read it, and usually not in a good way. Jonah is not a particularly heroic character. Jonah is kind of a whiner. He's kind of a drama queen. Jonah is a little selfish. Jonah is stubborn and he thinks he knows what's best. But God, in every situation throughout the story of Jonah, intervenes and sets his plan back on track. And that is so reassuring. It is so easy to feel like you and I and all of our haywire tendencies are going to throw God's plan off track. But the story of Jonah portrays a different picture. So we're going to read chapter 1 today. And there's a lot in here. And as you listen to what I have to say, I'll be explaining it. But I encourage you, go and read maybe chapter 1 or even the whole book of Jonah. This thing's 4 chapters. Like, it does not take up very much room. It is 3 pages total. Like, front, back, front of a page. You can knock this thing out in like 15 minutes max. So go read Jonah, take a look at it, and then as we're going through this, maybe you can pick up some things that you didn't get on your first time reading it. So without further ado, here we go. It is the first chapter of Jonah. Now, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, "Go at once to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." So, Jonah gets a word from God, and he has a job. Jonah is being called out to be a messenger of God. And it's funny because this guy named Jonah, Jonah means dove, like this animal of peace, the messenger of peace, the dove, Jonah. And then his dad's name is my truth, or God's truth. So Jonah's name literally means like, hey, this messenger of peace and truth. Jonah, son of Amittai, messenger of peace and truth. And we're like, wow, this guy sounds like the real deal. Oh man, this must be like a super good prophet. Like, man, wouldn't you love to be like messenger of peace and truth? Like, that's a pretty sick name. And God calls him and he says, hey, I want you to go to this city. And the city is called Nineveh. Now, you and I don't know this, but the people back then knew that Nineveh was the capital city of a people called the Assyrians. And the Assyrians were nasty. Like, the Assyrians were bad news. Like, the Assyrians were a conquering empire out of, like, northeast of Israel where Jonah is living. And they were, like, warlike and violent and sick. And they worshipped these evil gods. And they did all sorts of just evil stuff. And God says to Jonah, go to this city and cry out against it, for their wickedness it comes up before me. Like, I cannot handle what they're doing. I need you to go tell them what they're about. And Jonah, surprise, surprise, doesn't really want to go to the violent, warlike nation that is much larger than his and tell them off. He's not too enthused about that. He says, God, your plan sounds like it's going to get me killed. So this is what Jonah does next. But Jonah set out to flee to Tarshish, from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, so he leaves Israel, and he goes and finds this foreign ship, and he found a ship going to Tarshish, and he paid his fare, and he went on board to go with him to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. Say Tarshish 4 times fast, if you can. So, okay, God says, hey, Jonah, you are going to go northeast to Nineveh. And Jonah says, I don't want to do that. I'm going southwest to Tarshish. No, Jonah, I don't know why I keep on calling him Noah. I think I was teaching the kids about Noah earlier. Jonah runs in the opposite direction. And he's got this idea in his head, and it's kind of a funny idea. But I think you and I act like this, even if we wouldn't say that we could. Jonah says that he is running away from the presence of the Lord. Jonah thinks that if he can get far enough away from what God had planned for him to do, that God's plan that's scary for his life, those things that God has called him to do that maybe he doesn't want to do, or that he's uncomfortable with, or that he doesn't want to face, or some of those things that maybe he's scared of, and he's unsure of, if he's actually willing to commit to, that God's presence will just not be farther southwest. And we're going to see if this is the case. Jonah tries to run from the presence of God. But it doesn't work out. That's the first word of the next verse. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a mighty storm came upon the sea that the ship threatened to break up. Then all the sailors were afraid, and each cried to his God, and they threw their cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. And Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. These sailors, right? God's presence is still there in the sea, heading on the way to Tarshish. And the prayers of these sailors to their gods, they don't do anything. The captain came down to Jonah and said, "What are you doing sound asleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he'll get to do something. Our gods haven't been doing anything, Jonah. You need to call to your God and see if he can do something about this. Perhaps your God will spare us a thought so that we will not die." And Jonah gets up, but he doesn't call out to his God. Jonah gets up, but he does not call out to God to save him. Because Jonah knows that if he calls out to God, then he is following him again. That he is back on that path that he does not want to be on. And Jonah stubbornly, even when threatened with his life, does not call out to God, does not return to God's plan, is too scared to get back on board with what God has to say, and continues stubbornly to try to ride out this storm. Then the sailors said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots. Let's pull straws. Let's figure out, through means of chance, who the unlucky one is, who the cursed one is that is bringing this storm on us." So they cast lots, and the lots fell on Jonah. And then they said to him, "Tell us why this calamity has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you? Who are you and what did you do that this storm is happening to us?" And he said, "I'm a Hebrew. I'm part of that people that's supposed to follow God, but I'm really not on board with that. I'm part of the chosen people, but I kind of left, and I snuck out, and I'm running away. I worship the Lord, the God of the heaven," so the skies, "who made the land and the sea." In other words, the God of everything. God the most powerful. God the ruler of all. And then the men were even more afraid, and they said to him, "What is this that you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them so. These guys come to the realization that Jonah's God is more powerful. He is in control of all of these situations. And Jonah and his foolishness had just tried to run away from the presence and the plan of God, and it has put them all in danger. So they ask him a question. What shall we do to you? The sea may quiet down for us. Like, Jonah, what are you supposed to be doing that this God is chasing you down and his presence is still here with you and he's storing up this storm? And Jonah should have told them, Jonah should say, well, I'm supposed to go and I'm supposed to share this message with this people. I'm supposed to go up to Nineveh and I'm supposed to tell them about their wickedness. But look what Jonah says instead. He said to them, pick me up and throw me into the sea, and then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great storm has come upon you. Nevertheless, the men didn't want to toss Jonah in the sea, like they're not jerks. The men tried to row hard and bring the ship back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even more stormy against them. Then they cried out to God. Instead of their own gods, they cried out to the God, the Lord, Jonah's God, the all-powerful one, the creator of everything. Please, O God, we pray, do not let us perish on account of this man's life. Like, show mercy on us. We're not the ones who disobeyed you. Do not make us guilty of innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleases you. God, you are in control. We realize that. Jonah realizes that, but he's not willing to submit to God's control. So they picked Jonah up and they threw him into the sea, convinced it was going to kill him, convinced they were sacrificing him to an angry God. And the sea ceased its raging. And the men feared the Lord even more because they knew that it was his power that had been doing this. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. We're like, wow, God just wanted to kill Jonah for disobeying him? No. Remember, God's will for Jonah was to turn around and to go to Nineveh. God's will for Jonah was for him to follow his plan and to carry out a mission that he had set before him. And Jonah, even when faced with death, says, you know what? I'd rather be tossed in the stormy sea than go to Nineveh. And that is ridiculous. Jonah, you'd rather be tossed in the sea than go to Nineveh? Why in the world? Why are you so stubborn? Why are you so afraid to follow God's plan? Why are you so unwilling to hear what he has to say? Why are you so convinced that you're right about this, Jonah? But God, in his mercy, doesn't leave Jonah to die in the sea of his own stubbornness. Guess what? God, when you and I sin and we think we know better and we run off to some far land as far away from him as we can get, and we think that God doesn't know where we're at. We're thinking we're outside the presence of God. We think that God can't see what we're doing, that he's not interested in what we're doing, and that we can go our own way. God is still present there, and sometimes he brings these bad situations into your life to warn you about the destruction that is coming if you continue in that direction, and to turn you around. He turns up the heat so that you will get out of the kitchen. But Jonah is so stubborn that he tries to commit suicide instead of following God's plan. You're like, man, what is wrong with this guy? His head's all messed up. But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was alive in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. You and I are almost like dogs that are convinced that we need to be hit on the road. And no matter how many times we try to get trained, we just keep on running off. And God, in his mercy, has provided this electric fence, this painful reminder that is much less painful than the end that we could experience. And for Jonah, it was this storm. But God's ultimate plan for Jonah is redemption. He has a will in which Jonah follows his plan, and he is blessed and rewarded for it, and God's plan is fulfilled. And he wants the same thing for you and me. So we're going to see what happens to Jonah next week as God is redeeming him in his plan.